Deep within the isolated forests of Germany, a heavy, solid steel cap is permanently welded directly into the bedrock of the Earth. It marks the exact location of a multi-million-dollar project that modern structural maps describe simply as an inactive geological testing site. But the classified seismic records from the KTB Overdeepening Project reveal a completely different reality, one that required the immediate destruction of millions of dollars of scientific equipment. In the late years of the Cold War, engineers set out to push a drill bit further into the crust than humanly possible, aiming to reach the boundary where the Earth's mantle begins to melt. As the drill approached 30,000 feet into the subterranean dark, the fundamental laws of physics and geology began to break down completely. The temperature down there shouldn't have exceeded 200 degrees. Instead, the sensors registered a blistering 300 degrees Celsius, a temperature hot enough to turn solid stone into a semi-liquid paste. The drill bits, made of hardened tungsten carbide, began to soften and warp into useless shapes under a crushing atmospheric pressure that science couldn't account for. But it wasn't the intense heat or the violent pressure that forced the scientific directors to halt the project and completely evacuate the facility. It was the sound. To measure seismic shifts, researchers lowered highly specialized, heat-resistant acoustic microphones down into the open, unlined abyss. The audio data returned from the depth was supposed to be a low, predictable hum of tectonic friction and deep structural grinding. Instead, the tape recorders captured a highly irregular, rhythmic acoustic signature that sounded terrifyingly organic. The acoustic frequency didn't match the shifting of stone. It matched the high-velocity movement of trapped gases vibrating through massive, hollow cavities at an impossible speed. The drill hadn't just pierced through solid bedrock. It had broken into a gargantuan, high-pressure subterranean system that shouldn't have existed at that depth. Within 48 hours of receiving the acoustic files, the research team was hit with a mandatory federal non-disclosure directive. The expensive drilling equipment was violently cut apart. The main shaft was filled with thousands of tons of dense, chemical mud, and the steel cap was welded shut. The facility was abandoned, left to decay under the watchful eye of automated security cameras wired directly to regional defense headquarters. The official report concluded that the project ended simply because funding had dried up during the chaotic geopolitical restructuring of the early 1990s. But if the abandonment was purely financial, it doesn't explain why the immediate airspace above the clearing remains a permanent no-fly zone for civilian drones. Independent acoustic analysts who managed to acquire copies of the unedited KTB audio tapes before they were seized noted something deeply unsettling. When the high-frequency static is digitally cleaned, the sound behaves exactly like a massive, pressurized lung expanding and contracting deep inside the Earth. Some researchers believe the KTB project didn't just drill a hole. They believe it punctured a highly pressurized, ancient underground ecosphere that has been completely sealed since the formation of the planet. An ecosphere filled with highly volatile gases and kinetic energies that, if completely released, could destabilize the seismic baseline of Western Europe. The workers weren't sent home because the money ran out. They were sent home because they realized that the deeper they dug, the more the Earth was starting to push back against their intrusion. Today, the forest surrounding Windischeschenbach remains unnaturally quiet. The local communities living miles away refuse to enter the woods after dusk. They claim that on hot summer nights, when the atmospheric pressure drops rapidly, you can feel a low, rhythmic vibration hum right through the floorboards of your home, a vibration that matches the exact frequency of the sound recorded miles beneath the stone 30 years ago. The authorities successfully welded the abyss shut, but they couldn't erase the data that had already escaped the facility. For decades, the recordings were locked inside restricted archives, cataloged under military file numbers that completely hid their origin. If you look at the official maps today, the entire facility has been systematically reduced to a simple footnote, an abandoned scientific curiosity that led to nothing. But those who worked the late-night shifts at the derrick before the evacuation orders came down remember an entirely different sequence of events. They remember the way the entire steel tower began to shudder, not from the movement of the drill string, but from a harmonic frequency rising upward from the base of the shaft. It was a vibration that bypassed the dampening systems entirely, traveling up through the metal bones of the facility and settling into the teeth of every man standing on the platform. The team leaders tried to claim it was an uncharted pocket of high-pressure liquid methane, a common hazard when piercing deep tectonic fault lines. Yet methane gas does not produce a continuous, cycling cadence that maintains its rhythm even when the drilling engines are completely shut down. When they cut the power to the primary generator to prevent a friction fire, the mechanical screaming stopped, but the audio feed from the bottom of the line grew clearer. The microphones down in the dark were picking up a sonic wave that was propagating through miles of solid quartz rock, a sound that shifted in pitch every time the ambient subterranean temperature fluctuated by a single degree. It was as if the drill bit had acted as an antenna, tapping into a hidden network of vast, pressurized chambers that span the entire tectonic foundation of the region. The security protocols that followed the shutdown were not typical for an industrial accident. Within hours of the primary tape being logged, civilian technicians were replaced by personnel carrying security clearances that technically did not exist under federal jurisdiction. They did not attempt to salvage the drill string or reclaim the millions of dollars in fiber optic sensor lines that were still suspended down the bore. They simply brought in the heavy welding rigs and began sealing the entry point as if they were locking a vault door against an impending breach. The townspeople nearby note that the heavy transport trucks left the site in the dead of night, carrying no cargo except for sealed aluminum cases containing the raw data logs and magnetic reels. The official records regarding the workers' medical examinations following the project were classified under state security acts, hidden away from public scrutiny for 50 years. Rumors leaked from the regional hospital described a strange form of acoustic trauma shared by the entire drilling crew, a persistent low-frequency tinnitus that made it impossible for them to sleep in complete silence. They had become attuned to the vibration of the abyss, their inner ears damaged not by the volume of the sound, but by its microscopic structural frequency. Even now, the area remains in dead zone for modern cellular signals and digital tracking equipment, with GPS coordinates frequently dropping or drifting by several hundred meters without any logical atmospheric cause. The official geological maps of the state continue to list the site as a completely stabilized, concrete-capped borehole with zero environmental risk. But the lingering physical evidence tells a far more compelling story to those who know how to read the landscape. The pine trees closest to the welded cap have grown in strange, twisted spiral patterns, their trunks leaning away from the center of the clearing, as if reacting to an unseen force radiating upward through the soil. The soil itself displays an anomalously low moisture content, completely parched and sterile despite the heavy annual rainfall that characterizes the Bavarian hills. It is as if the heat from the 30,000-foot void is still migrating toward the surface, a slow, unstoppable thermal plume that is gradually altering the ecosystem of the forest. The authorities have spent decades maintaining the narrative that the project was nothing more than an expensive, failed academic experiment of a bygone era. They want the public to believe that the steel plate is just an ordinary piece of industrial junk covering a useless hole in the dirt. But you do not weld a steel cap with deep industrial seams unless you are absolutely certain that whatever is down there must never be allowed to find its way back up to the surface. The sound left inside the welded abyss was never meant to be heard by human ears, and the concrete plug sitting over the shaft is the only thing keeping the deep earth from speaking again. If you believe there are some parts of our world that should never